together kind of an Azure proof of concept outline. And what I wanted to show for a lot of the guys that I work with is that we can really construct the POC of Azure components in a very straightforward manner. The reason is that in cloud computing, there's like 4 or 5 different ways to do things. And often we get caught up in the details of an individual step rather than ensuring that the entire process can work correctly and well together, and really to define it as a good solution overall. For this particular example, I used Twitter data and stock data to create a prediction. That way I could involve many of the more complex platform service Azure offers, and then really show you how to put a workflow together to get them structured and functional. So, hey, let's go take a look at the code base first and get it executing. So, I like to show people how, really as designers, we should really be in touch with, exactly how to write the code and make it work. So what I have here is my Visual Studio project on my dev environment running in Azure. This is a console app to send data into my event hub to get the event pump working and send it into Stream Analytics, and then further downstream to an Azure function and eventually to an email. We'll cover all that in a minute, but first let's just run the console, and then let's run it with our test data, and I'll explain all that to you, and we'll get it running. It sends out a message string to the event hub, which is, as you can see, defined in the string as a JSON class. All right, so while that's executing, let's go ahead and explain what all these pieces are, right? Okay, so in this, you see a very simple outline proof of concept is I have a stock close price event. I have some processes that are going to retrieve the stock value, enter it as data into an event hub in a format, and then I'm going to have a Stream Analytics job that's going to process the data, and then call on the Microsoft Machine Learning prediction web service to generate a prediction, and then Azure Function to just simply go through some code, and then I'm using Azure SendMail platform service to send out a response to a customer for a recommendation. You can see I've got a couple of elements. I've got historical data, live feed data, prediction algorithms, event management. So a lot of things that you would normally say, okay, well, this is what we want to use. And then I've just got some simple assumptions that I want to cover, because what I want to do is show that these components work together well. And then I also want to show that the solution itself, so this stack of components, is a good one to choose. And that's because, like I said, there are many different stacks of components that you could select and variances therein. So for this particular proof of concept, what I try to do is really simplify into one slide both the workflow and the components to be utilized. And that way, both technical and non-technical personnel could understand what's occurring in this proof of concept and why we're testing out this particular workflow and stack of components. The particulars here are, of course, that because it's a machine learning data set that I'm using for prediction, that I have a couple of different data sets that will all have the same model. So I have training data, I have test data, I have live data. So in each of those cases, the data model, okay, I'm using a JSON class graph, right, will be the same. So the data being pumped into the event hub and then stored into the Azure tables and then utilized by machine learning are all the same model of data. It makes it really easy as I transition between testing and live data. It also makes the training data set and machine learning understood quite well. Okay, so you can review this, but just simply that I have data has to be pumped in for historical data to allow the machine learning algorithm to have a training data set for prediction. That's the green line. And then the black line, of course, is the actual processing of a request to produce a prediction, and then just simply processing that prediction and sending it to the customer. I mean, pretty straightforward stuff, and it all works together. So first let's take a look at the generation of the event data. And I do this in two ways in my console application. But you can see I'm just talking to an Azure Event Hub. I just connect to the Event Hub. I create a string message and then send it to the Event Hub. Really, really, really straightforward. The only difference I have here is that I'm producing a training data to test my prediction, and I read those out of files that are stored on my computer. And then once I get that data, I just break it down into JSON objects, filter it, and then produce a JSON class as the message. And you can see that's what I do here. The choice here is I also have a live feed data set. And in this case, I can say, okay, well, I want to use the live feed data, which is going to go look at exactly today's closing price for the stock I selected, in this case, Microsoft, pull the VIX data and the Twitter data and send it off. So, and in this case, this event data generator produces the same message format. And you see that right here. So the next step in our process as we look, right, is to go to the Stream Analytics. You'll find that in Visual Studio, and I definitely recommend this, is that you produce all of your coding in Visual Studio and then publish it to Azure. And so Azure allows you, like for the case of both Azure Functions and Stream Analytics, to use the editor on the portal. This is really, really difficult to do because it's really hard to debug. And Stream Analytics, in this case, allows you to run your stream job locally and execute upon it and have local outputs. This is really, really helpful in debugging. And certainly I would suggest that you follow the same manner I did here, which is produce everything in Visual Studio and deploy it to your Azure pieces. All right, so the next step was our Stream Analytics job. Starting right at the top, you see the first thing I do from my event data that's being pumped out of my event hub is I say, okay, well, let's take the data, so the close, the sentiment index, and the VIX data, right? The stock close date, and let's pump it into our machine learning prediction. And we do that by putting in a connector in Stream Analytics to our machine learning workspace service. And you see that it has the URL that machine learning web service set up, and it works quite well. The second is to put that into an out data set. And then third, what we're going to do is we're going to just start writing the data into our, you can see stock values VIX sentiment table, which contains all of our data. That's also pulled by our machine learning training data set to train our algorithms on how to respond to the prediction. And then you also see that I put the result of the particular prediction into something called out predictions, which is another Azure table. So we can look at those in Visual Studio in pretty direct fashion. We can say, here's the out predictions, and we can review what's been done. You can see I already ran that one earlier today. And we can take a look at the Azure function and understand how it's executing. And of course, we can see that it's executing just fine. All right, so if we're in our script and we've got a connection to our stock predictor, let's take a look at that stock predictor function in machine learning. And you can see I have a very simple experiment set up here with training data. You can see my training data is hooked up to the guy, right here. And once we take a look at that output data set, we see it's the same one represented in Visual Studio. Of course, it's connected to the Azure same table name, which is the stock values VIX sentiment table. So now we kind of see how it's all connecting. We're using a machine learning algorithm, training data that's connected to an Azure table that's connected to our Stream Analytics job that's dumping data from our Event Hub into there. It's all sounding exactly like it should. Of course, when we do a training experiment, it generates a prediction experiment, and we add web services to that. And then we have a web service, which is this one, and this is specifically the one I'm using in this case. And we can test that web service individually. We can say the current stock price is 130. I think it closed today at 129 or something, whatever. And we have a sentiment index of 12. The VIX is low at 14. And we can test it. And you can see that it actually did respond like it should have. I just can't see it over my picture. And if we click on the pictures, we can see the exact result string as it was outputted in as a JSON class. It's very important because our understanding of the classes, and not our understanding of the class, our transformation of the string to the class is very helpful since we already know the type. So we know that that piece is working. We can take a look at our stream analytics job in our group, and we can see it's executing correctly. Well, if it loads, it did. Okay, and it's telling us our outputs. And then next we can take a look at our Azure function. Okay, while that's loading up, right? Remember, they're all published. This is the Azure function here. Here's the exact definition of our Azure function. And you can see it's very straightforward, right? When we create in a Visual Studio, it gives us a template to define the function. All I did was I added content to the template, and I have to say it took a little bit of debugging to get it working. Fortunately, I'm able to execute it in Visual Studio and then publish it to see how it works. I have a couple of debug outputs here so I can understand, if it wasn't working correctly, not a big deal. And I just take the parameter input and turn it to JSON, take it apart, right? And then I pass it into, create response, right? Which is, I'm sorry, it's here. Get data.execute with the class and the log, and then I'm just going to create the object response. In this case, I'm creating a SendGrid client and creating the message, defining the recipients, and then the body, which is pretty simple body for the result of our email. And so SendGrid looks like this, right? It's an Azure platform service. I'm using the free tier. You can see I've tested it a bunch of times, and then we go to the activity. We can go see that I've sent a couple today already, and it's kind of good to go, right? So here I'm using all my platform services. There's the one right there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go see if it returned. And there it is, today's stock recommendation. Right, it generates a very simple result. We can see this was a test data set, January 14th, 2014. Close price on that day was, for Microsoft stock, was $31, and the stock, and the prediction is to hold. So we're executing all our pieces very well. So let's go here. And remember, I told you I had a live feed. Live feed is just using live data from some HTML feeds. In this case, this particular stock quote is it's all JSON data. Fantastic to use. And we're just going to run our console app again. And in this case, we want to pump out the live data from today. Oh, I think I just misspelled it or something. Let me just run it again. That's kind of funny. Always you get little errors when you execute. All right, so I think I didn't want to type live. I think I wanted it to type true. There we go. All right, so you can see it pulled today's data, which is 129.78 for Microsoft price, has today's dates, it pulled the sentiment data, all looks good. And then a quick review of what happened, remember? So that's our black arrow. We had a notification event hub. It was processed in Stream Analytics for a prediction request. Stream Analytics sent a request to the prediction web service, which retained a result. And then we enter Azure Function, process it, SendGrid, send the mail. So we'll be expecting in about a minute that we'll get a response out of SendGrid for our mail. In the meantime, we can go ahead and look at our Azure tables to see how it's executing. And that was this one right here at 02 after the hour. That's that guy. And you can see our result was, right? 0 fail. Everything's executing in the Azure function. Let's see if this guy overrode it. It did. Here's our current data set. And we can go in using our Cloud Explorer if I wanted to open the stock value sentiment index table. And I usually like to go through this like this and timestamp, refresh. And there it is. Okay, so it's all processing, and now we'll just look at our email and see if we got the live data. And we did. And you can see it's for today's date. It's executing well. All right, so the two things I really wanted to show everybody here is, one, for proof of concept, right? Construct a simple plan, right? Because, for the most time for architects, the components that we use and the elements are usually well known. A lot of cloud technologies are coming out really quickly, and we don't have as good an understanding of all the pieces and how those puzzle pieces fit together. So if you can design something fairly straightforward to test, in this case, an event hub and event processing and a workflow processor like Stream Analytics, and then we can simply put what we want to test to see if it all works as expected. And like I said, our machine learning algorithm is not particularly good, but it does execute well and as expected. Then we can produce proof of concepts quickly and in a straightforward manner. In this case, this took me about 4 days to build. That's it. Thanks for your time. If you have any questions or anything, it's burnettm@hotmail.com. See you later.
Early in the morning, rising to the street, light me up that cigarette, and I strap shoes on my feet. Got to